So today I'm doing part 2 of my May 2020 wrap-up, all the books that I read in the second half of May. So stick around to see what they were. Hey friends, Roger here. Welcome to my channel, Roger's Reads. So as I mentioned, I'm doing my May 2020 wrap-up, part 2. Which are all the books that I read in the second half of May. And I put a link to the part 1 video up in the card above. So the first book I want to talk about is entitled Deathless Divide, written by Justina, Ireland. So this is a sequel to Dread Nation, which is a historical fiction novel that takes place after the US Civil War and after the zombie apocalypse. So in this book, or in this duology, they're called shamblers rather than zombies. And this book follows our two main characters, Jane McKean and Catherine Devereux. Interestingly, the book alternates between Jane's and Catherine's point of view, whereas Dread Nation was entirely told from Jane's point of view. Given that these two characters were so different and started out as enemies, I really enjoyed getting the story from both of their perspectives. So like the first book, the narrative voices here are phenomenal. And I listened to this book again in audiobook format and thought that the narrators did an excellent job. So this story picks up where the first book left off, where a supposed utopia once again falls to a horde. And our characters again embark on a desperate search for somewhere out of the reach of the zombies slash shamblers. So I really can't say too much about this without spoiling the first book. Except in this story, I will say that Jane is hell-bent on vengeance, and it's nearly destroyed her. It's undoubtedly led her to do some pretty horrible things in this story. And you know, I always find it's always hard to talk about a second book in a series, as you really can't discuss too much of the plot without spoiling the first book. But I can say that similar to the first story, there are numerous setbacks, tragedies, triumphs, and plenty of shamblers, with Catherine and Jane's friendship sorely tested through it all. There was also, I'll just say, a particularly heartbreaking event that completely blindsided me in this book. And I was like, what? No, you didn't, but they did. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So I guess you really can't have a story about a zombie apocalypse without perhaps losing a beloved character or two. Also in this story, the villain was completely unexpected and it totally took me by surprise. But all in all, I thought this was a phenomenal conclusion to this series. And I think it's only a duology, but I could be wrong. But I believe the author only had plans to write 2 books. But there's definitely an opportunity here for another book, as the ending was open enough for that. And if Ms. Ireland were to write it, I certainly would buy it, as I really loved the storyline and character development of this novel and adored the friendship theme that ran throughout. There are also plenty of plot twists, leading the story into several different and compelling directions. And I thought the book also nicely portrayed how our characters had to deal with and overcome constant racism, as well as deal with misogynistic assholes. But Catherine and Jane, as always, did an excellent job of putting these types of people in their place. So yeah, like the first book, this is another solid 5-star read for me, and I love this duology. So the second book that I want to talk about is entitled Secret at Skull House, written by Josh Lanyon. So this is the second book in Josh Lanyon's cozy mystery series, Secrets in Scrabble, and we follow our snarky and often clueless main character, Ellery Page, who once again finds himself in a whole heap of trouble. As it turns out, Ellery's ex-boyfriend and famous horror author, Brandon Abbott, has just come to town and purchased the supposedly haunted slash cursed Skull House mansion. Abbott, who is a horror writer, has purchased the house because of the 2 past murders that have occurred there. Now, Ellery is not happy at all about Abbott's surprise appearance in Pirates Cove, given that the relationship ended quite badly. Now, things even become more complicated when Brandon stirs a hornet's nest of a 20-year-old murder case of a local high school football player and the subsequent disappearance of the supposed killer, a case that certain townspeople want to be forgotten. So as Brandon begins to investigate the cold case, much to the chagrin of certain locals, Ellery once again finds himself thrust into the middle of the case. So Ellery begins doing some amateur sleuthing to try to clear his name and reputation, which are once again being smeared in the local paper. And as in the first book, Ellery's amateur investigating leads him into even more trouble. So in addition, in this story, we also see the continuation of Ellery's hot and cold romance/non-romance with Police Chief Jack Carson, which again stalls before it ever takes off, which, truth be told, resulted in somewhat of a frustrating reading experience. So as this is a cozy mystery, there's no sex, cursing, or on-page violence, but what we do have here is a fast-paced, whimsy, light, and comforting read with a few exciting twists along the way as decades-old secrets become revealed. But all that being said, I found that Secret at Skull House contains all the things that cozy mystery readers love. Quirky and colorful locals, a small town, plenty of gossip, and a compelling mystery to solve. It'll be interesting to see where Lanyon takes this series in future books. So the next book that I read in May was entitled The Boyfriend Project, written by Farrah Rochon. So the story follows Samaya Brooks, a tech genius whose boyfriend Craig, as she discovers, has also been dating 2 other women. Enraged, she confronts him at a restaurant where he's on a date with one of the ladies, the same restaurant reservation that she booked for their date that he had canceled earlier in the evening, and a video of her explosive confrontation ends up going viral on BookTube. But on the positive side, she ends up forming a close relationship with the other 2 women, London and Taylor. And as their friendship moves forward, the 3 women create a pact not to date any other men for the next 6 months. Instead, they'll use that time to work on themselves and work on their dreams. What Samaya didn't count on, however, is sexy Daniel Collins, the new hire at the tech company where she works, Trendsetters. So she tells herself that she will not allow herself to become distracted by Daniel, though that's a lot easier said than done. And pretty soon she wonders whether Daniel just may be too good to be true, which could indeed be the case. Because as we learn, Daniel is indeed not who he says he is, but rather he's on some sort of undercover assignment at Trendsetters, thus keeping a massive secret from Samaya. And his assignment is slowly revealed throughout the story. So it doesn't help matters that Daniel also begins to fall for Samaya, causing him all sorts of guilt and anguish because of the need to deceive her. Now, given that the book starts out with Samaya being deceived by her 3-timing boyfriend, the deception issue here is especially touchy, and Daniel is pretty much positive that this is not going to end well. So what's nice is that we go back and forth between Samaya's and Daniel's point of view, so we get the story from both sides. I also really enjoyed the workplace vibe in this story. Trendsetters definitely sounds like a kind of place where I would mind working at. I also enjoyed the conversation about why Samaya is such a perfectionist, how she has to work twice as hard as her co-workers, being black and being a woman, and how her work always has to be perfect the first time because she's unlikely to get a second chance. Unfortunately, too much of this is still true in the workplace today in many instances, but I really did like the book's message about diversity and equality in the workplace. And I think that Daniel is multiracial too. I think he was Korean and black, if my memory serves. So there's excellent representation with both of these characters. So all in all, this was a super fun own voices rom-com with strong, admirable characters and a touch of mystery, which added an extra intrigue to the narrative. I also thought there was excellent chemistry between our two protagonists, and also I enjoyed the friendship theme that ran throughout the story. So yeah, The Boyfriend Project. The next book that I read was entitled Again by E. Lockhart. This is another E arc that I read, so I'll put the cover up above somewhere. So Again is a young adult contemporary story that takes place over summer. It follows our main character, Adelaide, a high school girl who's about to begin her senior year at a private school. So she's heartbroken and somewhat depressed, and she's spending her summer walking dogs to earn some money. So her boyfriend has unexpectedly dumped her and left the country. She's failed to turn in a major project for one of her classes, which could cause her to be expelled from the prestigious school, all the while trying to come to terms with her feelings about her brother's drug addiction. So over the summer, she encounters some new people, some of whom may or may not become new love interests. So what's unique about this book, though, is that certain events in the book are played out in several different multiverses, I guess, each resulting in a different outcome. So in other words, we see Adelaide's story play out in a variety of different ways. It's kind of like seeing her story unfold in parallel universes where there are numerous versions of herself. So she makes different decisions in each multiverse, falls in love with different people, and has different conversations about the same topics. So I thought this aspect was unusual in that it prompted us to contemplate the what-ifs in our own lives and look at how changing one decision, one small decision, or saying something differently, how that could change the outcome, and how even the smallest of changes can affect how things turn out. So for instance, we see her have several different versions of a conversation with her professor, or modified versions of the same text message thread with the boy that she likes. So in some versions of the storyline, Adelaide suffers enormous setbacks and heartbreaks, while in others, she finds happiness with someone different. So again, I guess, is an experimental novel in an unusual format, and because of that, it's not the kind of novel, not the kind of story that you can simply kick back and settle into. I actually found the format kind of pulled me out of the story over and over again every time we dipped into a different multiverse, which I personally found a little bit jarring. Now, as for the plot of the story, it's not really easy to discuss it, given that there are several different versions of it. But what I found to be at the heart of this novel is Adelaide's complicated relationship with her brother Toby, the drug addict, which was heart-wrenching in places and hopeful in others. In every single multiverse, she navigates her feelings about her brother's situation and works her way through anger, regret, mistrust, fear, resentment, but with love at the root of it all. So all in all, I really did enjoy Again, but truth be told, I'm personally not really a fan of experimental fiction, so as such, I'm really not the ideal reader for this story. Though I did find the multiverse format unique and creative, I also found it a little bit difficult to connect with the characters because of it. But readers who enjoy experimental novels or multiverse storylines should definitely give Again a try, as it's a refreshing take on the contemporary novel. It's also a story with a lot of depth and many layers, with a variety of themes such as love, loss, regret, siblings, heartbreak, family dynamics, addiction, self-esteem, and the interconnectedness of things, and how even the smallest of changes can have huge repercussions. So the next book I want to talk about is a book entitled The Wives by Tarryn Fisher. And this is a twisty and gritty psychological thriller and a Book of the Month Club selection a few months back, and I was really looking forward to reading it. So from the synopsis, we learn that the story follows a woman referred to as Thursday, whose husband has two wives, Monday and Tuesday, which are the days that he spends with them, and none of the wives has ever met the others. So Thursday is crazy about her husband, so she's willing to put up with this weird arrangement. Yeah, I know, right? So as the story progresses, Thursday grows less and less happy with her situation and sets out to learn a little bit more about the other wives. So she ends up befriending one of them, a woman named Hannah, who happens to be pregnant with Seth's baby. And to her horror, she discovers that Seth might be abusive to his pregnant wife. So now, all of a sudden, Thursday isn't quite so enamored by her husband. Now, I will say that the first part of this book was utterly addicting and intoxicating. I could not put it down. I would have given the first part of this book 5 stars. But then things go south pretty quickly. The storyline gets strange and unbelievable, super over the top. The story just turned on a dime, and we ended up switching to an entirely different reading experience. And I really don't want to give away the major plot point, but I will say that the ending just did not sit right with me at all. I actually found it rather problematic. Let me just say that I personally think that certain themes should never be used as plot points or plot twists, which was the case here for me. And because of that, the book really fell flat for me and resulted in a massive eye roll at the end. But that's just my take on the story, and I know a lot of people really loved this book and raved about it. Though I do think the book might be a tad polarizing, because I did recall seeing booktubers' videos about this where some people didn't enjoy it at all and felt the way I did at the end. It's definitely an edgy, disturbing, and more than slightly uncomfortable story. So you know what's funny about this is that I did not realize that the protagonist's actual name was Thursday until the very end of the book. I don't know how I missed that. I honestly thought that was just a reference to the day her husband slept with her, like Monday and Tuesday. So, yeah, duh. So, yeah, The Wives, that just wasn't the book for me. So the last book I'm going to talk about is entitled Nothing to See Here, written by Kevin Wilson. So this was such a fun, unusual book. This follows our main character, Lillian, who's a little bit down in her luck at the moment. She's then summoned by her wealthy best friend Madison to her mansion, where Madison offers her a position to work as a governess for her husband's 10-year-old twins, Roland and Bessie. So up until now, the twins were homeschooled and living with their mentally unstable mother until she recently passed away. But there is a catch with this governess position. Apparently, the twins spontaneously combust whenever they get agitated, setting fire to pretty much everything around them, though the fire does not harm them at all. Lillian also has to keep the kids' ability a complete secret because their father, who is Senator Roberts, is vying for Secretary of State. So it's also worth mentioning that the children who are suffering from pretty severe trauma brought on by their mother are kind of wild with violent tendencies leading to biting and attacking people. And of course, then the flames come. So Lillian ends up agreeing to be the nanny, and we follow her and the fire children over the course of the summer as she slowly establishes trust between the nearly feral kids and herself. She then begins to realize that maybe she needs these extraordinary kids almost as much as they need her. She then begins to fight for the kids' best interests as feelings of protectiveness arise within her, and the kids end up providing her with a new, surprising sense of purpose. So as the story moves on toward a somewhat explosive conclusion, Lillian has to make an enormous decision that could affect her and the kids' lives forever. So I really love this quirky little book about exploding children and their nanny. It was wickedly funny, charming, and endearing, an all-around feel-good yet odd story with a super weird storyline, and I thoroughly ended up enjoying it. So that is it for my May wrap-up. Did you like this video? If so, please click the like button below, as it really helps my channel out. And as always, I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support, and we'll talk to you all in the next video. Roger and out.